ثم أما بعد. So I start by praising Allah, God subhanahu wa ta'ala, and asking Him to offer His blessings and salutations upon His last and final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon his kin, his companions, and all those who follow his guidance till the last day. So I'm very pleased and honored to be invited to ICCL here in Lancaster. I must be honest, before I moved to Pennsylvania several months ago, didn't really think there was a Muslim community in Lancaster. I knew it was home of the Amish and the horse and buggy carts, and that's kind of the impression that I had, but I've been quite pleasantly surprised to find that there is what appears to be a thriving Muslim community, and that's great. Alhamdulillah. So the topic that we chose to speak about tonight, what the Prophet ﷺ came to teach us, I think we're going to get into that a little bit, but to start off with a practical aspect of what the Prophet ﷺ came to teach us is that one of the things is that he taught was kind of what we call the adab, or the courtesy or etiquette of the majlis, of how we actually sit and arrange ourselves when we're listening to someone. So I find this seating arrangement a little bit weird, because I have the men over here kind of side-eye, I have the women in front of me over here. So I would prefer if everyone, the men can slide over, sit over here. I think the women can still see. And then maybe the people in the chairs can kind of bring it over this way a little bit, so I don't have to look from the corner of my eye. So, one of the reasons that I chose this particular topic, if you attended the Jum'ah, Friday congregational prayer earlier today, one of the things that I think I tried to emphasize and speak about is what is it that will keep us following those authentic, pristine teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the things that I mentioned is that if we are to isolate scripture, in other words the Quran or even the Hadith, from the practical aspect and living aspect of the prophetic legacy, then that's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to follow Islam as we know it. Because one of the things about scripture, about Quran or the Hadith, is that, especially Hadith, and Hadith are the recorded sayings and deeds and things that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ either tacitly or expressly approved of. And they are kind of like moments in time. So when someone records a particular saying about what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would have said in a particular time, if you only take the text and you are not equipped with knowing the context, in other words, you can take it outside of its context, if you will, then you may be left with an incorrect impression. And that's easily done with the Hadith, and to some extent even with the Quran, it can be done. So many of the verses that some people are not familiar with the Islamic tradition might find problematic, or many of the Hadith, I think most of the time is due to the idea of people not understanding the particular context from which it was taken. Add to that there are many Muslims who themselves bring them out of the particular context and have various type of agendas that they're pursuing, whether it be political or social or cultural, whatever it might be, but they fit the verses and the Hadith to follow that particular agenda. Let me just give you one case in point before I get into the main topic. So much has been said lately about the latest, I don't know the word to use anymore for these people, but the latest almost unbelievable, despicable act perpetrated by the group that calls themselves Daesh. And Daesh is just an acronym in Arabic, Dawla Islamiyya fi Iraq wa Sham, or the Islamic State as they call themselves. And they brought some textual evidence, to my understanding, or what they believe to be textual evidence, to allow for someone to burn someone alive as a punishment. And one of the things about here's a big word, epistemology, or how we know what we know, is that we look at the sources, and then we have certain criteria for how we are to interpret those sources. So one of the most important things about our tradition is that all of the hadith have something in the beginning called sanad. And sanad means chain of transmission. So for example, how many of you were here earlier this afternoon when I gave the Friday sermon at the pulpit over there? How many people were here? So who wasn't here? Now the people who are here, who can tell me in one sentence what I spoke about? Anybody? People who are here. Go ahead.
How Rasulullah was very compassionate and present.
Okay.
You have
Anyone else? Was that exactly what I spoke about? People who are here?
you have to live the life as Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Your family, everyone should practice what
Mm-hmm.
he did.
Sister.
Character of the Prophet.
Right. You want to say something, Shaykh?
Scholars who are inherited with Prophet.
Mm-hmm.
How it's important to see the chain of transmission, and that's why it's important to talk to ulama who know about this chain of transmission rather than pick a hadith or Quran and look at what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, without Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu life, interpreting Quran and hadith is not really correct. You cannot do it without Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu life.
Okay. Now you weren't here, right?
Nope.
And you just heard what everybody said.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No. This is important. So now that after you heard five different sentences about what actually transpired, do you think you know enough now to be able to explain and maybe even repeat the particular sermon that I gave while I stood on the minbar there, based upon what you just heard?
Probably not.
How come?
Because, well, I've studied a little bit about this topic. I'm hardly the kind of guy who can stand up and give a speech without any preparation.
Mm-hmm. Would you say also that since you weren't there and you're only hearing snippets from people here and there, that the most that you're going to have is snippets, unless perhaps you had some context of who I am, why I came here, and maybe why I was saying those things, or you know a little bit about me. You know more about me. Because the more that you know about me, then the more you know about, well, why was he saying those things, instead of just those snippets in time. So the point I'm trying to make is the people who know, or who knew the Prophet Muhammad the closest, were who? The companions around him, right? And so even though they were the reporters of his acts, his deeds, what he said, and so forth, nevertheless, they were reporting particular aspects in time as they heard them. But to have an overall impression of how he actually was, we look to their own deeds, their own character, what they became, based upon the influence of the Prophet Muhammad upon them. And then the companions influenced a generation after them, and then a generation after them influenced them, and so forth. So this is what we mean by not just chain of transmission, we're talking about hadith, but even chain of transmission that gives us an idea to the normative practice of Muslims, how they actually went about practice Islam. How is it that it has not been recorded ever before in history that Muslims burn people alive as a punishment? Never happened. But yet we are here this day and age in 2015, and some group is claiming that it has some mustanad or has a link back to the Prophet Muhammad that this might have happened. And what they use, our books of history, they record everything, right? And unless you know the methodology, right, when a particular incident is reported, and then it's without a chain of transmission, or someone is missing from the chain of transmission, or they will use words like qila, which we call sigha tamreed, which means it was said, passive voice. All of these are indicators that you got to take this thing with a grain of salt, right? But the normative practice, right, is something that has been transmitted and narrated maybe by several people, and then carried from one generation to the next. And if you look at the methodology of the hadith narrators, for example, like in Bukhari and Muslim, this is what they follow in their books. They will bring several hadith with different chains of transmission about the same thing. Why would they do that? Why do they have repetition? Yeah, there's about 7,000 plus hadith in Bukhari. Of those, only 2,000 plus are not repetitive. So why all the repetition? And the reason for the repetition is to show you this is a normative practice. This is what actually became transmitted, and they started to practice it. And it's not just something that is spurious or may have happened once, or the person who narrated is not a single person out of over 10,000 companions who were around who may have narrated it, so it gives you that idea. So there's a particular methodology that we go about, and even how we interpret the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These people, these things I'm talking about now, they have no idea what I'm talking about. They don't do that. They're completely cut off. They don't have a sanad. They don't have a chain of transmission. They don't have anything going back to even previous generations. They have no scholars. They themselves are not scholars, nor did they learn from scholars. That's why I emphasize the point of ulama warathatul anbiya, that the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. And I think we as Muslims, we have to be very discerning about who we understand our deen from. Right? Imam Malik, he was one of the great scholars, he said, هذا العلم أو هذا الأمر دين. This knowledge, or this thing that we're talking about here, this is your religion. This is your way of life. فَانظُرُوا مِمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. Right? So look to who you're taking your deen, your religion from. Right? And when he says that, he means be discerning. In other words, for example, he said that I've had hundreds of teachers, and I did not sit down to teach anyone until at least 70 of them gave me permission to do so. So we have a system where not anyone can just speak. Not anyone who has a Facebook page and has 10,000 likes now becomes a scholar, and then he talks or she talks, and then people follow them. But are we really discerning about who they are, where they got this from? Are they following the methodology that has been tried and proven and transmitted from one generation to the next? This is quite important. Some of this has been lost, I must admit, or I would say most of it has been lost. Many different factors, especially in the Muslim world. We're talking about post-colonialism, we're talking about several wars, we're talking about displacement, we're talking about a plethora of refugees. Syria alone, which was a population of 18 million before the Civil War began, 9 million of those people, exactly half, are refugees or displaced people. And add another maybe 300,000-400,000, we'll be good. Numbers that are astronomical. Right? The United States has 300 million. Imagine 150 million people became displaced within the United States. What kind of catastrophe that would be. And then add a few million, right? If we're going to 5-6 million of those killed. That's what's happened in Syria. This is the type of calamity and catastrophe that's going on right now. And obviously what's going to follow with that is much confusion about religion. And in that vacuum came out groups like ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, and others, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, all of these groups that came about came in that vacuum. So there was definitely certain political aspects that contribute to it. But the important thing for us is that we want to know, so we're tired of saying Islam is not this and Islam is not that. What is Islam exactly then, right? What is it that we're trying to do? What is it we're trying to teach? What is it that we're trying to follow? And we should look no further than the person who brought us Islam, whether it be via the Quran or via his own deeds and words, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Manaf, who lived, Ibn Abdul Talib ibn Abdul Manaf, who lived 1400 years ago, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what we want to do in this time is, let's read the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, right? Let's go to the source and see what he actually told people. One of the type of ahadith that's often reported is people would go to the Prophet ﷺ and they would say, Awsini, right? They would say, give me advice, tell me what to do. I want to know how to live my life. What type of advice can you give me? And the Prophet ﷺ, when these people would come, he would give them most likely advice that would be pertaining personally to them, but at the same time, it could be understood in a general sense. This is why in one of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, I was given something no other Prophet has been given, called Jawami al-Kalim. And Jawami al-Kalim means few words, but great meaning. So if you look to the way the Prophet ﷺ spoke, it was almost like what we call an aphorism, like a wisdom saying. You know, and he had these sometimes very short words, but so much meaning expressed. Right? If you read the hadith Imam al-Nawawi arranged in the 40 hadith, you find many of these hadith. لا ضرر ولا ضرار. دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. لا ضرر ولا ضرار. There is no harm or reciprocating of harm. Few words, but so much meaning. دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. Leave that which you find doubtful for that which you do not find doubtful. Right? These are all issues that come into the everyday life. Right? And we shouldn't think of Islam as just being this kind of big apparatus for affecting social change, which is often how Islam is pictured today. Like, it becomes very politically oriented, socially oriented, bringing about big political or social change. But the secret is that unless you can change yourself Unless you can go through a period of self-transformation, you're not going to change anybody. This is the mistake we keep making. That we can change, we can better societies, and we fail to realize that change begins with oneself. Change begins with one's own day, one's own daily routine, one's own activities. And if you can't change that, right, if you insist on living your life the same way, you know, what did Einstein say? When you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, it's madness. And that's what happens. People do the same routine, right? Don't break their routine, waking up late, not observing, not being very observant of the prayers and things like this, and then they think some type of big social change is going to come about. But change begins here, right? And begins in your heart, begins in your home, begins with your family around you, begins with your dealings with people. And how you deal with people are a magnifying glass into who the person you actually are. So someone who claims that they love Islam, and they love the Prophet, love God, and they want to do all these things to better society, but they fail to deal with people even on a very minute basis, in an equitable manner, in a just manner, then they're only fooling themselves. One of, to me, the most poignant chapters of the Quran, which is very short, comes at the end, Surah Al-Ma'un. And most of us don't realize it when we read it, probably read it regularly because it's one of the short surahs that's easy to memorize. But in this particular surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equates or draws a connection between one's prayers and how one treats one's neighbor. That kind of connection. And it's the one chapter in the Quran that actually says, woe to the people who pray. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Right? Now, this is an example. If I take it out of context and I don't bring the verse after it, it'll say like, oh look, the Quran is telling you prayers are not good. Or it's, don't be a person who prays. But you have to complete it. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Right? Those who are remiss in their prayers. Why are they remiss? The next verse. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Yura'un means they do it to be seen. So they're just being ostentatious. They're not sincere. So there's some type of, so now we're running into sanctimony. We're running into people doing things to be seen, other people to see them, so they can curry favor with them, so that they can give them position, they can give them prestige, they can give them status. All the things that are ugly about the dunya, right? But they're using something that's supposed to be beautiful, one's prayers, but using it in an ugly way to achieve some type of dunyawi, or some type of this lower world achievement. And then the last verse, الَّذِينَ يُرَاءُونَ وَإِيش وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. Right? And they do not permit the ma'un. What's ma'un?
Give somebody.
Yeah, they said in the exegesis of Quran, ma'un is, you know, this used to happen more often, I bet. In Lancaster, it used to happen a lot. People knock on your door and they need salt, they need sugar, they have some guests over and they don't have enough, and they, you know, we didn't used to have Walmart and Target and these big stores and this convenience. There used to be a time even in this country where you go to the general store and maybe once a week you'd find the sugar. And then you'd have to wait till the next week for the new supply to come in. And so what happens when you run out? You knock on somebody's door. And I lived in societies in the Muslim world where this was the case. You know, can I borrow your iron? Can I borrow your salt? You have some salt, you have sugar, you have garbage bags, you have this. So here it's saying, وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. These people who are doing their prayers just to be seen, then the thamara, the fruits of their prayers, are nowhere to be seen because they can't even do the basic minimum. Someone knocks on your door, they need something from you, and you refuse to give it. Right? And here, this particular verse, you can understand it. What are the neighbors? Muslim, non-Muslim, wherever they may be. Right? Because it doesn't specify. It doesn't say that يَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ مِنْ مَنْ فَقَطْ يَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. It only says they don't permit that to be neighborly. They're not neighborly. So that means if we're claiming to be believers, we're claiming to be good people, but yet we're not neighborly. Right? You want to know a person how they really are? Several ways. One of them, ask the people in their house who live with them, ask the people who are their neighbors, and ask the people who travel with them. And it's interesting, the word in Arabic for a traveler, musafir, it comes from the word isfar. Right? What is asfar an shay? What does that mean? It means to unveil. Right? Something that is musfar means unveiled. So travel unveils your true self. because you're spending so much time, you're spending 24 hours with someone, like a whole cycle of their day, so very hard to keep up your best behavior. Actually, the least reliable place to ask about somebody is in the masjid, is in the mosque, because everyone's supposed to be on their best behavior. So they come in for the 1 hour on Friday maybe, or the 20 to 30 minutes Isha every day. It's not that difficult to maintain best behavior, that situation. But how are they regular life? Why did the Prophet ﷺ say, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لَأَهْلِي وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لَأَهْلِي? He made the criteria of who you are as a person, as a human being, not how much you pray, not how much you give in charity, not of any of those things that are very ostensible, but rather who is best to their families. And he said, I am best to my family. Right? كان في خدمة أهله، كان في محنة أهله. He used to help his family, he used to sew his own shoes, he used to help them around the house. That was the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. How many of us are upholding that ideal? How many of us, for example, we push our women and our families to do extraordinary things, to make things, interesting for us in terms of food, we all do that. But the Prophet ﷺ, he was in the service of his family. And he made that the criteria by which to measure yourself. And when he described the best Muslim of his time, right, obviously after the Prophet himself, but who was the best Muslim of his time? Abu Bakr Siddiq, the first Khalifa, the first Caliph, or the first one to take the religious authority after him. How did he describe him? He said, مَا فُضِلْ عَلَيْكُمْ بِكَثِيرِ صَلَاةٍ وَلَا صَدَقَاتٍ. Right? He's not better than you because of how much he prays extra or how much he gives in charity, even though he was one of the most prolific in both of those categories. But that's not why he's better. He said, وَلَكِنْ بِشَيْءٍ وَقَرَ فِي صَدْرِهِ. Because of something that's stored in his heart. That's why he's better. That's why he was called the Siddiq. You know why he was called the Siddiq? Right? The one who, min as-sidq, the one who is the strongest believer. Why? Because as Muslims we believe in the miraculous journey of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, and then via the 7 levels of heaven in one night, and he came back in the same night. Isra wal-Mi'raj. And before the Prophet ﷺ had a chance to tell people like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq the next morning, the Quraysh, the people who opposed him as adversaries, got wind of it. And they started telling the other people, do you know your friend Muhammad? He claims he went to, traveled all the way to Jerusalem and then came back and they went up to heaven. And what's that? Right? And so people got a little bit defensive because they said, that sounds unbelievable. When they told Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, what did he say? He said, if he said it, it's true. If he said it, it's true. I don't need to hear anymore. If he made that claim, he doesn't lie. So I believe it. Hence, thereafter, he was known as as-Siddiq. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. What was the Prophet ﷺ's name even before Islam, before he became a prophet? Al-Amin. Al-Amin. Right, and the hadith described him as Sadiq al-Masduq. وَهُوَ الصَّادِقُ الْمَصْدُوقُ. And he is the most truthful one and the one most believed. So one of the pinnacle character traits for us is trustworthiness, honesty, upholding truth. Right? Prophet ﷺ was asked about the person who steals, the person who fornicates, the person who does all these things. Can they be Muslim? Yes. Can a person be Muslim and lie? No. So lying, prevaricating, misrepresenting is one of the worst forms of sin. Because the Prophet ﷺ only came to uphold truth. So how can we manipulate that in a way that is no longer truth? It has to be upheld. And so this is one of the premier things we need to uphold, to be trustworthy, to be honest people, right? And we as Muslims, we have to be trustworthy in everything. If tax season is coming up, if you cheat on your taxes, or you manipulate them a little bit, and you took a lot of cash, and you're a business owner, and you kind of don't put that on the books, it's a form of lying. You can disagree with the tax system, you can disagree that you don't want to be in the 36% bracket, you want to be in the 15% bracket, so you hide the cash and things, and many other people do it, right? But if you say to yourself, well, everybody does it. But we're not about being everybody. We're about being the best. We're about having the highest moral caliber. So if you're living in this country and you're living here legally and you're a citizen or a permanent resident, then you should abide by the laws. Not because of the laws, but because as a Muslim, as a believer, I need to follow the laws itself. The Muslim world is in chaos because people divorce the two. They believe that going through a red light, if there's no policeman there to stop me or watch me, is okay. Because they're doing it for the policeman who's there to stop them going through the red light. But we don't do it for that reason. We do it because following order, following laws, if we feel the law is unjust, then we take another course of action to try to change it. But while it's in play, then we follow it. That's Islam. Those people who entered Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia with passports and visas, in Islam, this is called aman, that they've been given safe passage. And it's not for anyone after that to revoke that safe passage. So when they enter those countries in that particular way, no one is allowed to harm them. No one is allowed to hurt them. What these people are doing is a travesty. They don't even understand that concept. They entered with visas, they entered illegally, they entered with presumption of being safe, then they have to be treated safely. Even if they were the worst enemy of ours. But they entered in that particular way, then we observe that. Why? Because the Muslim holds up his end of the bargain. Right? Because when you stamp their passport and say, enter, it's telling them you're safe. It's telling them you're safe. Don't worry. You'll be safe here. So where is that? Muslim can't be duplicitous. You know, we have duplicity all over the world. In other words, we say one thing and we do something else. And even the Prophet ﷺ, he said, مَا كَانَ مُؤْمِنٌ يعني, he doesn't يختلس النظر or يختلس العين. Mu'min is not one to kind of, blink at someone and mean something else. You have to be sarih. You have to be straightforward. You have to say what you mean and mean what you say. You don't have double speak. You don't say one thing to a group of people and then say nothing to another group of people. We don't say something while we're amongst ourselves as Muslims and then outside we say something else to the non-Muslims. Can't have this anymore. We have to be straight. And we have to show people that this is who we are. This is what we're about. So I think the best way to see what we're about and see the teachings is that we read some of the actual words of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the remaining time. So one of the very famous hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said to Ibn Abbas, who was the young cousin of the Prophet, and he was probably a young boy at the time, maybe not more than 10, 11 years old, where he says to him, narrated by Imam al-Tirmidhi and Ibn Abbas, قال كنت خلف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يوما فقال لي يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات احفظ الله يحفظك احفظ الله تجده تجاهك إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله واعلم أن الأمة لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك بشيء إلا بشيء قد كتب الله لك وإن اجتمعت على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتب الله عليك رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف. زاد الإمام أحمد في رواية تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة اعلم أن الصبر على ما تكره خير كثير وأن النصر مع الصبر وأن الفرج مع الكرب وأن مع العسر يسرا. So Ibn Abbas, who was a young companion at the time, and he said, I was behind, standing by the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya ghulam, young man, I want to tell you a few words, to teach you a few words. 10, 11-year-old. He said, Ahfad Allah yahfad. So, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of God, who will be mindful of you. Watch Allah, be vigilant with God, and God will be vigilant with you. In other words, He'll take you under His wing. He'll protect you. Ahfad Allah tajidhu tujak. You're mindful of God, you will find Him in front of you. If you ask anything, ask of God, ask of Allah. And if you seek help from anyone, seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And know that if the ummah, the whole community, were to get together and to benefit you with something, they would not benefit you with anything except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it to happen. And if they wanted to all get together and harm you with something, they would not harm you with anything except if Allah wanted to have that happen to you as well. رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف. The pens have been lifted and the ink has dried on the pages. And another narration in addition, it says, know God, know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fil raha, in easy times, He will know you in difficult times. And know that patience, and being patient with that which you dislike, you will find much good. And that aid and victory will come with patience. And that openings will come with calamities. وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. And with difficulties, ease will come about. Pretty heavy words to speak to a 10 or 11-year-old. Right? This is kind of the basic theology of Muslims. namely that nothing happens in the heavens and the earth except that God wills it to happen, and that He wills it, He knows about it, and He makes it happen. So nothing will come, nothing will happen except if Allah wanted to happen that way. So all of the calamities, all the things that we suffer, right, at the end of the day we have to realize that we may dislike it, right, we may have issues with it, we may even try to change it, but we have to realize in our hearts this is something that Allah wanted to happen for a particular reason. And God doesn't do things in vain. Allah doesn't do things, what we say, He doesn't do things in vain. Everything has a purpose behind it. But we as human beings may not always realize and recognize the purpose. Sometimes it's beyond us to see the purpose. Sometimes God will bring us to Him closer via calamities, via suffering, right? Because if we don't know God for raha, right? If we don't know Him in the easy times and the good times, and we forget about Him then, and we only recall Him in difficult times, then one of the ways that we can be brought closer to God is if He gives us difficulties. So it's better to save ourselves all of that trouble and to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the good times. And we should never endeavor to want to be in a calamity. Right? We should never say, Yani, I want ibtila, so Allah can raise me. We don't want it. Right? We want to be always in afiyah. We always want to be in good health. We want to be in good spiritual well-being. We want our children to be in good well-being. We want our neighbors to be in good well-being. We don't want any kind of test and tribulation. But when the test of tribulation comes, then we need to show fortitude. We need to show patience. This is where showing patience in and of itself, that is the victory, when you are patient with it. All of the things that can happen to you that are very ugly in life, right? You can make them beautiful. You have the power to do that. How? You combat ugliness with beauty, not ugliness with ugliness, right? Not ugliness with ugliness. As we said in the khutbah today, idfa' billati hiya ahsan, right? Repel things with good, don't repel them with evil, right? Repel the things you dislike, repel the things that are difficult in life with good, right? Why did the Prophet ﷺ teach us even certain things to say when calamities happen? Like we said in the khutbah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Right? These are not just words. These are things to stir the heart. Right? Allah is sufficient for me, and I put my complete reliance upon Him. Right? Unfortunately, some Muslims, they see Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel as something to say to, almost like a shatima, yani almost like a curse word to, you know, when something happens, someone cuts you in the traffic, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel feek. You know, we're like, we want to stick it to them. That's not what Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel means. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel means Allah suffices me, God suffices me, and I am the one, I rely completely upon Him. And all these things that are happening, they're what we call wasa'it. They're intermediaries, right? And those intermediaries are not the thing that I'm looking for. One of our great ulama, Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, he said that, think of it like if you have a dog, and you throw a rock at the dog. What does the dog will do? He won't run after you, he'll run after the rock. He doesn't realize that it's the person who threw the rock. We're the same way. Rocks get thrown at us and we go after the rocks. But we should be contemplating and pondering the one who sent it our way, namely God, namely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It used to be that there was kind of a way that Muslims lived their day. When certain things happened that were disagreeable to them, they would look back to themselves. You know, they would say like, when my donkey or my horse is not cooperating with me today. In our times we would say, you know, the car didn't start right away, maybe I got a little fender bender, I got a flat tire. I get outside and someone took the air out of my tires. You know, then I get mad, where's that person? But it used to be Muslims, they would say, what did I do? SubhanAllah, God is sending me some type of message. There's some type of risala here. I need to review myself. I need to have introspection. We as a community at large, we fail to do that anymore. Very little introspection. More blaming, pointing fingers. More, unfortunately, victimization. You know, of all the things people say about us and, you know, how they think that, you know, we support terrorism and we do all these things. But at the end of the day, I think the reason for all of that, because they don't know us. Right? They could create their own narrative because we haven't done a good job of letting them know us. Right? No one is asking German Americans today if they approve of what Hitler did in Germany in World War II. It's not a question. No one is asking Japanese Americans about Hirohito and the Japanese Empire in World War II. No one is asking Nigerians even about what's going on in Nigeria. But the question comes up, what do you think of ISIS? What do you think I think of that? It shouldn't even be a question. It should be a non-question. But because people don't know us, right? We haven't done a good job of showing them who we are, what we stand for, right? I think most of the times we operate like a special interest group. You know, we're like the NRA or the Cuban lobby, where we kind of very vociferous about quote-unquote Muslim issues. But what about greater issues? I remember I participated in a climate change march that happened a few months back, which was kind of like nationwide. And I was very disappointed to see that the number of Muslims in New York City, we did this, and it was probably like, at least 800,000 people was one estimate. And the Muslims who were marching with us, I didn't count more than a few hundred that day. And I even heard people say like, you know, who cares about fish and dolphin when we have Muslims being killed everywhere? They don't get it. This issue, climate change, is one of the reasons that we're having these protracted wars over resources, over land, over many things. Because we are not living a lifestyle that's sustainable for the world to continue. What people don't realize is if people, everyone in China, for example, or India, live like Western Europeans or like Americans, there are not enough resources to sustain that lifestyle. The way that Americans live and Western Europeans, we use 7 times the sustainable level of the whole country. We use more resources than the whole continent of Africa, several times over. And if everyone in Africa wanted to live like that, or everyone in India, or everyone in Southeast Asia, the world will not be sustainable. So we're going to come to a point where people are trying to live like that. More Chinese are buying cars than ever before, and Indians as well. And there will become a point where we can't sustain this lifestyle for everybody. And these are very pressing issues. And guess what? They're issues Muslims should be concerned with. Yes, there are Muslims being oppressed and being killed, and other things are happening all over the place. But we as members of humanity should be also concerned with what happens in general to humanity. We're not just about our group, right? We're not the chosen people. Don't ever think we're the chosen people. There's no verse in the Quran that says we're the chosen people. نحن شعب الله المختار. أبدا. What does it say? تلك خير أمة أخرجت للناس. But why? تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. That's why. So this is the best community that has been sent, but with conditions. تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. Right? You enjoy the good, you forbid the bad, and you believe in God, you're believers. You take those things away, we're not the best people. We're worse. We'll be the worst people. Right? You take anyone who's, any Muslim country, you take away their Islam and look how they live, they're the worst people. I'm one of them. I'm from the Arab world. We're the worst people without Islam. We're the worst people when we don't follow the principles that sound religion guides to. Because then we fall into all sorts of kind of devious type of practices and self-loathing and just practicing and satiating ourselves and our lower passions and desires. A lot of what we call ananiya, selfishness, right? I've seen all of that when people move away from the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So we're not the best people unless we follow what our Prophet ﷺ came to bring. And he taught even young people like Sayyidina Ibn Abbas. And Sayyidina Ibn Abbas became more on to be one of the greatest companions and one of the greatest mufassirin of the Quran. And he is one of those waratha. He's one of the heirs, inheritors of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So one of the other young companions also was Ibn Umar, the son of Umar. And Abdullah ibn Umar was one of the closest Sahaba. He was the son of Umar, but also he loved the Prophet ﷺ to the degree that he wanted to copy him in everything. Even, they'd say, to the extent he would do things that he didn't know why the Prophet did it, but he would just do it anyway because he loved him so much. Like one time they said in Hajj, he was on his mount, his camel, and he went up to a hill and made a turn and came back. And they asked him, why did you do that? He said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ do it. I don't know why he did it, but I want to do just like him. And it's also known that Ibn Umar had this black tar, and he would put like a check or an X in the places in Mecca and Medina where he knew the Prophet ﷺ walked. And I was told by people who were involved, someone I trust who knows people involved in the excavation, some of the building projects in Mecca or Medina, that they found those black tar marks, those X's, from the time of Ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu. So Ibn Umar was one of the waratha. So what did he say to him? روى الترمذي عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنه قال أخذ صلى الله عليه وسلم بمنكبي فقال كن في الدنيا كأنك غريب أو عابد سبيل وعد نفسك من أهل القبور. وفي رواية النساء وأحمد زيادة في أول أعبد الله كأنك تراه. So he said to the son of Umar, he grabbed my shoulder, he's relaying the hadith, he said he grabbed my shoulder and he said, be in this life like you're a stranger or passing through, and count yourself amongst those of the cemetery, of the grave. And in another narration that says ziyada, in other words, in addition to it, worship God as if you see Him. Worship God as if you see Him. Again, he was a young man telling him these things. So pass through life, you're ghareeb. We're not made for this world, right? If you think that you're made for this world, I guarantee you'll find nothing but disappointment. If you have all your hopes, all your desires in this world, you're always going to be disappointed. There's always going to be the job that you didn't get, the promotion that you didn't get, the school that you applied to you didn't get into, the girl you wanted to marry who said no, or the man you were hoping would ask to marry you and he never did. You're always going to find disappointments in this life. Always. And the important part is that those disappointment, even if you look at the word disappointment, it comes from the word appointment. In other words, our expectations. Right? And the thing is that this is not a life where expectations get fulfilled. Don't count on this dunya, because that's the nature of it. And in fact, your lack of fulfillment of your expectations is a sign. Right? When Muslims used to look at the world around them, they would see signs. Right? There's three things they would think about when you look at the signs around them. One, as the Quran tells us, right? Look to the signs of the heavens and the earth, and then you see that this perfection, this beauty, this grandeur, this majesty couldn't have come just like that, right? Couldn't have just came out of nowhere. That's impossible, right? When you look at it, when you contemplate it, you have to believe that there's someone not only created all this, but is sustaining all of this. So those people who subscribe to atheism, they said, Big Bang, random came about. Let's follow your argument to its logical conclusion. Let's say it happened like that. Well, what's sustaining it? Why doesn't it go back to randomness? What keeps it going? Why in that particular point that you claim came out of nowhere, but yet, however, continues to sustain itself? Yet, however, the earth is the exact distance it needs to be from the sun to sustain life. And the moon revolves around the earth in the exact manner it does to create the waves and to regulate the night and the day. How's that? All of that just happened? Just luck of the draw that we got? And how is it continuing? Why does the moon continue to do that? Why does the moon stop doing that? Why does the sun not burn up? Why does the earth not get enveloped into the sun? Why do these things continue? Right? And if you look at the grand scale, you also look at the microcosm, right? Because it's macrocosm and microcosm. The celestial world is just a reflection of who we are. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ? Don't you look within yourselves too? We also have revolving bodies. We have a central heart, we have lungs around it. The cell itself, right? The cell itself consists of a nucleus, and it consists of things revolving around it. These are all ayat, signs for us to reflect, right? And Muslims spend much of their time reflecting on these things. And in fact, the so-called scientific revolution that happened in Europe would have never happened if Muslims didn't first contemplate this. So there would have been no Copernicus if there was no Farabi, for example, if there was no Ibn Sina. None of those things would have happened had they not had predecessors upon which they learned and from their works they studied from. And the reason that they look to the signs of the heavens and the earth, not so that they can manipulate it, not so that they can make man the center of the universe, but rather to arrive at a greater certainty that God is the center of the universe. That's why they did it. And when Allah says about Abraham in the Quran, Sayyidina Ibrahim, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلِيَكُونَ مِنْ إِيش مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ. And this is how we show Ibrahim the Malakut. We show him the celestial bodies of the heavens and the earth, so that he can be those who have certainty, who have greater certainty. So the first thing they contemplated the fikr, contemplated the heavens and the earth and the world around them to have greater certainty in God. They also contemplated themselves, as we said, and they contemplated their own behavior, right? And their own suluk, their own ways of doing things. How can I be a better person? How can I be a better human being? How can I affect my life in a way that will bring good effect to everybody else's life? As we said in the khutbah, خَيْرُكُمْ أَنْفَعَكُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of you are those who bring benefit to others. If we're not bringing benefit to anyone else, we're not the best of people, right? We should bring benefit. The Prophet ﷺ brought benefit to animals. He would name his animals. He would call his naqa, his camel, al-qaswa. He would call his mule, al-duldun. He gave names to things. And when you give a name to something, it's what we call tashrif. You make it a noble thing. Compare that to how Muslims treat their animals today in Muslim world. And compare the behavior of the Prophet ﷺ. One time a woman was with him during Hajj, and she cursed her camel. And the camel came and complained to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, this woman is not with us. We don't take someone who mistreats their animal like that. Because that's a created thing. And anything that's a created thing, that's a creature of God, it's a noble thing. Even the pig, even the dog, right? Those things that we consider to be filthy and so forth. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them? Does it mean that we should just, mistreat these animals? We're not allowed to eat from their flesh, the pig, that's true. But that doesn't mean that it gives us license to mistreat the animal. Some of the Muslim scholars said that the dog is a creature that if touched will put filth upon you. But that also is not a license to mistreat the animal, right? Even the Quran talks about the noble character of dogs. مُكَلِّبِينَ تُعَلِّمُهُمْ مِمَّا عَلَمَكُمُ اللَّهُ, right? They're the ones that you teach from what God has taught you. Use them as a hunting animal, for example, in this particular example. But that's an archetype. Use them as a seeing eye dog, use them as a guard dog, use them as a dog for a purpose, and it's a noble animal. Horses are noble animals, they're mentioned in the Quran. وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْحَمِيرَ وَالْحَمِيرَ تَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Right? And the horses and the mules and the donkeys, so that you may ride them, and as an adornment. They're a thing of beauty. وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And God creates that which you do not know. Now we have planes and trains and automobiles and space shuttles. It's mentioned in the Quran. He creates that which you don't even know about. So these are noble things, right? And when Allah talks about the dunya for us, He uses the word taskhir. وَسَخَّرَ لَكُمْ. سَخَّرَ لَكُمْ. Taskhir means it's put at your disposal. Your disposal, why? Because it's a trust. It's an amana, right? When He describes Adam, إِنِّي جَعَلُ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِيش Khalifa. I have put in the earth a steward, someone who is going to be entrusted with the stewardship of the earth. In other words, it's a trust not to be abused, not to be manipulated. Muslims used to plant trees and they know that it only bears its fruit 20 years later, but they did so nonetheless because that's what you're supposed to do. This is a stewardship of the earth. When you cut down a tree, you put another in its place. And even cutting down trees, only you cut from the branches that you need. You don't cut down the whole tree. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, be economic in your water use. Right? Even if you're next to a flowing river, don't use too much water. Don't think it's ever going to run out. These are all meanings of stewardship. Where is that in the Ummah today? Right? Where is our use? Some of the Muslim countries, especially in the Gulf, have the highest carbon footprint in the world. They use the most resources. They use gallons upon gallons upon gallons of water to irrigate a golf course. And yet people in Africa, in Namibia, in Botswana have to travel 5, 6, 10, 8 kilometers a day back and forth to get potable water, water that they can drink, and they continue to do so. So where is the justice in that? Where are these issues that we're talking about? So yes, there's dhulm, there's oppression, there's these things, but the greatest dhulm is dhulm al-nafs, right? The greatest type of oppression when you oppress yourself, when you don't avail yourselves of that which you've been given. What a gift we have. What a gift of Islam if we really, really knew what it was. And if we really, really knew who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was. If we really followed him. If we really took his example to heart. If we really studied his life. If we really read his sayings. And then we read them with an heir of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Someone who's an inheritor. Someone who is worthy of the blessing and worthy of the legacy of Muhammad ﷺ. If we did that, we would see a completely different world. Completely different life, right? We're also busy with what? I went to the coffee shop today, and every single person had a telephone, and they're talking to the telephone, and they're sitting with people, and they're not talking to each other. They're talking to the telephone. What's happened to people, right? At least it used to be a time when people had conversations. People would spend time together. Ask yourself, when was the last time you all got together in your family, in your household, and had dinner or lunch together, all together? Or is just the food made and everyone kind of, whenever they feel like it? When was the last time you had a family conversation? When was the last time you had a family outing? When you all got together as a family? When was the last time you sat down with your kids and taught them what the Prophet ﷺ said to Ibn Abbas, and what he said to Ibn Umar, and said to these people? So we can get all riled up about many of these geopolitical international issues. That's what we should, right? The ummah is like one body. If one of the parts of the body suffers, then the other parts complain with fever and feel it. Yes, that's true. But there are certain things. One of my teachers, he taught me there's two circles we have to be concerned with. There is the circle of concern, and then there is the circle of influence. So the circle of concern is very big, right? I'm concerned with not just Muslims in Botswana, but human beings in Botswana, in Venezuela, in the Philippines. I should be concerned with the plight of my fellow man. That's a circle of concern. But the circle of influence is going to be much smaller, right? I can't maybe possibly influence the course of events in Kuala Lumpur, but here in Lancaster, right? What is going on in Lancaster? What are the issues people are facing in Lancaster? Muslim and non-Muslim, right? Are there people who actually live in the streets or are homeless in this city? I know in the city I live close to, there are, in Allentown. There are people who live in the park, and they have nowhere to go, even in this frigid cold. Am I concerned about that? I'm not just concerned, but do I have something, can I do something to influence that? Can I possibly put pressure on government to open more shelters? Can we contribute to building a shelter? Can we do these things? Or are we stuck upon ourselves? This is what the Prophet ﷺ did. He brought khair, he brought good to everybody. That's why people loved him and loved Islam, because he brought good to them. Right? But if we're just yelling about our issues and yelling about our thing, we act like an ethnic group and not a source of good for humanity, then who's going to care about Islam? And who's going to care about us? We have to be concerned with everybody. And those things that we can influence, we have power to do so, let's do them. Let's affect it. Let's do it from our muntalaq, right? From our heritage, from our concern, from our base, from the teachings of Muhammad ﷺ. These are universal teachings. I challenge anyone to bring any of these hadith and read them and tell me they're not universal in meaning. And tell me that they don't have good in them. And tell me that they don't bring about an enlightenment and a spiritual uplifting in those who read them. I challenge anyone to do that. I'm more than happy to challenge every single hadith in this book. People want to do that. So, I think we're supposed to end at 8:20? 8:30? Okay.
Chef can take as much time.
I don't want to bore you. Maybe we'll read one more. I'll read one more. This is one of my favorite hadith too. And this is now read by Hudayfa, one of the close companions. Hudayfa also was one of those companions where there were hypocrites who lived during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They pretended to be Muslim, but they were doing so to get some type of special favor. And the Prophet ﷺ never rebuked them during his lifetime. He always was courteous to them, even prayed upon them when they died and so forth. But Hudayfa was given the names of all those people. And so Umar one time came up to Hudayfa and he asked him, he didn't say, who are the names of those people so we can try to, see who they are and avoid them or do something like that. He said, is my name on that list? Sayyidina Umar said, is my name on that list? That's what he was concerned with, right? The true believer is concerned with their own state. And they don't have time to think about everybody else's shortcomings. This is the same Umar who said about people, Rahimullah Imran ahda ilayya ayubi. May Allah have mercy on the person who shows me my shortcomings, right? Every day we should be thinking about our shortcomings, our faults, and how we can correct them. And sometimes you can't see your own shortcomings, right? You can't see the ugliness about yourself. Sometimes you need other people to point them out to you. Imam al-Ghazali points out 4 ways that you can find out about your shortcomings. You can have a teacher, what he calls a Shaykh al-Murabbi, someone who is a teacher in a position of authority over you. It could also be a parent, but someone who's in that position and they say, you know what, Fulan, you do this, you don't do prayers on time, I see you kind of speaking in a negative way about people. Someone like that, who can show you your shortcomings. Or, Akhul Nasuh, someone who's a peer of yours, a friend, and who's a real friend, right? The word for friend in Arabic is sadiq. In other words, they're truthful and honest with you, not just letting you know what you want to hear so that you remain friends. If all your friends you're afraid to bring to their attention anything that might be a shortcoming, then they're not really your friends. And if they're afraid to do that with you, what type of friend is that? Right? The true friend is one who wants the best for you, and part of being the best for you is to help you overcome your own faults. They're not doing that. What type of friend is that? So seek out those types of friends. The third way they say is بِمُخَالَطَةِ النَّاسِ, to actually be out in the world and mix with people. Because you might see bad things and you say, oh wait a minute, I'm like that. You know, like for example when they used to have on these commuter trains, everyone was allowed to smoke. And then they made it into one train, I think now. Now I think you can't smoke anywhere on the commuter trains. One of the things they used to do, I heard someone tell me that you would go to the train, the carriage, that everyone is smoking, and then bring someone who's a smoker, and then just look at those people, what they look like when they're smoking. And they're all smoking. And then you feel like, do I look like that? Or look at someone who gets angry and gets out of control. You know how ugly that is? But imagine, you know what, you look like that when you're angry, right? And so when you see these things around you, then you know that you want to avoid them. And then finally, the one that is the most subtle, that few people pay attention to, is that what your adversaries say about you, people who don't like you, what they say about you. In other words, when they criticize you and they say things about you, then that should look back to, well, wait, maybe there's something about us, right? And so for me, when they did these cartoons, for example, the Denmark ones in 2006, and then they reprinted them, they choose to disparage our Prophet ﷺ. And they don't disparage our Prophet, because he's not affected by that. But when I look at the images and see how they do it, you know, like drawing bombs and things like this, then it's really an indictment not of Muhammad ﷺ, it's an indictment of us. That's their impression of Islam, based upon what they see, right? When there's smoke, there's fire. So there's people amongst us who do things like that. We can't deny it. There are people who disturb people amongst us who do things like that. So it's an indictment of us. We have to look back to ourselves and we have to improve ourselves, right? Because this is what they're seeing. But if they saw love, if they saw beauty, if they saw mercy, if they saw rahmah, they're not going to do those things. They'll be wanting us, right? And this actually happened, historically speaking. The Crusader armies that ventured into places like modern-day Lebanon and Syria and Tartus and Anatolia and that whole area, there are Christians living there, right? The Crusader army, they were Roman Catholic Christians, or from the Roman Catholic Empire, from the Roman Empire. The Christians living in those areas were Eastern Orthodox Christians. And the schism that happened between Eastern Orthodox Church, between Constantine, before that, that's a long history. But they were two separate churches. They actually sided with the Muslims. And they, for example, they even asked later times the Ottoman army, and they would ask the army of Salah ad-Din that we're aligned with you. We want you to protect us from the Roman army, from the European army, because we are closer in deed and action and understanding to you. Culturally, we're much closer to the Muslims who are living in those lands than we are to the Europeans, even though they may share a religion, but they don't share our culture, they don't share our language, they don't share how we are. And why would they do that? Because they got better treatment. They were treated better with the Muslims than they were treated with the Western European Crusaders, who didn't differentiate between Muslim or not when they came in and pillaged and plundered those areas, especially like Jerusalem when they did that and other areas. They didn't distinguish between Muslim and non-Muslim. It was all to them Arabs, or all to them Saracens, as they would call them. So they didn't make a distinction. So we need to recapture that. People who lived amongst us, they used to love living amongst us. Look at the Jews who were exiled from Spain in the Inquisition. Any non-Catholic was exiled, so were Muslims, so were Jews. Where did the Jews go after that? They went to two places. They went to North Africa, Morocco, and they went to the Ottoman Empire. And they went eastward towards the lands of Anatolia. That's where they went. Even in the state of Israel, people don't understand, the original Zionists, where were they living before they went to what is now called Israel? They were living in Turkey. They were part of the Ottoman Empire. The only place that they found safe living and safe passage were the Muslim lands. They didn't find it in Europe. They couldn't live in Europe and do those things. They found it in the Muslim lands because they felt safe. And this is something that we should feel honored by, that people feel safe with us. And we need to return that. right? We need to live those days again. People will feel safe living with us. Our neighbors around here, they should be happy they have a Muslim neighbor, right? We have to be the best neighbors. We have to maintain our properties. We should maintain the lawn. We should, when snow comes, you should be the first one out there to clear your sidewalk, or maybe in the sidewalk of your neighbor, if need be. This is what being neighborly meant. Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel said to me, مَا زَالَ جِبْرِيلُ يُوَصِّينِي بِالْجَارِ حَتَّى ظَنِنْتُ أَنَّهُ سَيُوَرِّثُهُ. Jibreel the Archangel Gabriel kept telling me about the neighbor, how I have to be good to neighbors, until I thought you would make him an heir, an heir of an estate after you die. That's how important neighbors were. Even being neighborly is mentioned in the Quran. وَجَارِ الْجُنُبِ, those who are neighbor are closest to you. So, why? Because they're the most affected by you. They see you every day, they have to deal with you on a daily basis. You have the ability either to make that person's life miserable, or to make that person's life beautiful, right? How often when you have like a bad neighbor who's loud music, it makes your life miserable, because you can't get away from them, they live next to you. So either they move or you move, right? So you have to do that. You have to be good to the neighbors. So this last hadith that narrated by Hudayfa, where he says, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تكونوا إماعة تقولون إن أحسن الناس أحسننا وإن ظلموا ظلمنا ولكن وطنوا أنفسكم إن أحسن الناس أن تحسنوا وإن أساءوا ألا تظلموا. So Hudayfa, he said, the Messenger of Allah said to me, لا تكونوا إماعة, and the إماعة is the one who kind of just doesn't have doesn't have character, just kind of sways with the wind, and is not someone who, in other words, I would think in our times it's a reactive person, someone who just reacts. So if someone is bad to them, they'll be bad to them, and they're reactive. They don't have a kind of character themselves that they're operating from. So he said, don't be like this. Don't be, the word they use today is automan. An automan is someone who just you get caught up in traffic, and then they give you the finger and they get all angry. They do that automatically, they didn't even think about it. Don't be reactive. Don't say, if people are good, we'll be good. And if people oppress us, then we'll oppress as well. But rather, وَطِّنُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. In other words, establish within yourselves, if people are good, that you're good as well. And if people are bad to you, that you will not oppress them. Don't be the oppressor. Right? So even if they meet your ihsan, if they meet your kindness with isa'ah, they meet it with something you dislike, doesn't mean you stop being muhsin. Right? Why? Because we want God to be that way with us. How much isa'ah do we do? How much are we remiss in everything? But nevertheless, we still ask God to look past us. We still ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to look past all those transgressions anyway. So don't we want the same? If we want that from God, don't we want it for other people? So we should be. Sayyidina Aisha said about the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّهُ كَانَ لَا يَنْتَصِرْ لِنَفْسِهِ إِنَّمَا كَانَ يَعْفُو وَيَغْفِرُ. Prophet ﷺ is not someone who sought revenge on his own behalf. Never. إِنَّمَا كَانَ يَعْفُو وَيَغْفِرُ. He would pardon people and let things go, and not take them to task. When he entered into Mecca, and with a 10,000-man army and unopposed virtually, and he reached the Kaaba where the people were hiding and they were afraid, and they asked him, what will you do with us? He said, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم أنتم الطلقاء. I will say to you as Joseph said to his brothers, to the 12 tribes, he said, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. There is no blame upon you today, you are free to go. He didn't force anyone to convert, he didn't force anyone to do anything. If they wanted to leave, they could leave. If they wanted to stay, they could stay. That was the Prophet ﷺ. And he entered the city, مُطَأْطَأ الرَّأْس, with his head down in humility, not as a conqueror. One of the Ansar was carrying the raya, the banner, as they entered the city. And he said, إِنْ يَوْمِ مَلْحَمَةً. He said, today will be a day of malhama, yani of epic victory, like a warrior. And the Prophet rebuked him. He said, لَا الْيَوْمِ يَوْمِ الْمَرْحَمَةِ. He said, today is a day of mercy, not a day of epic victory. He took the standard from him and gave it to someone else. Because that's not how we're entering the city. That's not why this blessing God has given us. It's not for that reason. So we operate from our own character, not how people treat us. If you just treat people the way that they treat you, who are you? You have no, as we say, you don't have a personality. You're not operating for something that is stronger than this, right? But the person of character, regardless of how people treat him, regardless of what they think of him, وَطِّنُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Right? Make it who you are. That you're a person of character, a person of honesty, of trustworthiness. People lie, doesn't give you the license to lie. People cheat. Don't say, well, everybody cheats. Everybody cuts the red light. Everybody cheats on their taxes. Everybody parks on the grass and not in the parking lane. Everybody parks in the fire lane when it's too crowded. Don't say those things. That's not an excuse. Never was that. It's a logical fallacy to say, I support my argument because everyone is doing it. Well, everyone is doing something wrong, maybe. But have the courage, because it takes courage to be different. And it takes courage to encounter evil, to encounter iniquity with goodness, with wholesomeness, with ease, with mercy, with facilitation. Prophet ﷺ told Sayyidina Mu'adh and Sayyidina Ali when they went to Yemen, يَسِّرَا وَلَا تُعَسِّرَا وَبَشِّرَا وَلَا تُنَفِّرَا. Go there and facilitate things for people. Don't make it difficult. وَبَشِّرَا. Give them good news, glad tidings, make them hopeful. وَلَا تُنَفِّرَا. And don't offend them, don't push them away. Right? Mu'adh himself, he led the people in prayer once, and he read a very long surah. And then the Prophet rebuked him, so he said, أَفَتَّانًا أَنْتَ يَا مُعَاذ. Are you trying to cause tribulation for the people? Why you have such a long prayer? There's the infirm behind you and people with children. Prophet ﷺ would hear children crying behind him, and he would shorten the prayer. Right? And that's a principle. سِيرُوا عَلَى سَيْرِ أَضْعَافِكُمْ. Go to the pace of the weakest amongst you. That's our principle. Not the principle of drag people along and force them no matter what. No. We should be more compassionate and more open-hearted for encompass everybody. Everybody should be encompassed in our tradition, in our understanding, in our love, and our mercy. So it's 8:30. I apologize if I went over time a little bit. I thank all of you for listening attentively, and I hope there was some benefit. Any mistakes were from me, and any benefit purely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum. So at this time we'll open the floor for questions. I'll pass one mic on the sister's side, and brothers can stand up to speak here. We'll repeat the questions.
I have a question. Maya would go first.
Come closer.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for the talk, first of all. My question is basically dealing with what you talked about in the beginning of the talk, dealing with Sanad and where we get our religion from. And basically what I'm asking is, how do we reconcile troubling things we see in the interpretations of Islam by the great ulama? For example, in Tafsir Ibn Kathir, the commentary on 123rd, I believe, ayah of Surah At-Tawbah, the one that says, fight those who are closest to you and let them find in you harshness. It basically, according to my reading of his commentary, supports the idea that jihad should be some sort of perpetual war against the non-believing world, kind of like what ISIS is doing nowadays. In Imam al-Ghazali's book on the etiquette of marriage, you can find him literally saying, or taking the statement that marriage is slavery for the woman quite literally, saying things like she should not talk to her neighbors. If she goes out and one of her friends recognizes her, she should pretend that she didn't recognize the person's voice. And such things, I think, honestly, do trouble me. I find the hadith of Muhammad ﷺ that says, wrongdoing is what causes trouble in your heart, even if people give legal opinions in support of it. So my question is basically, how do we reconcile it when the great ulama say things that trouble our hearts, and if we're going to say these great ulama are fallible in some ways and they represent a different time period, say you could say Ibn Kathir was representing a time where the caliphate was very expansionist, and of course his interpretation of Islam would follow that, then what value exactly is the Sanad? Where are we going to get our Islam from, if not our hearts, and we find troubling things among the classical interpretations? I know that was kind of a rant, and I apologize.
What's your name?
James.
James. That's an excellent question, actually. And it's one that I've heard before, and I'm glad you asked it. And we're going to find things in what we call the Turath. One of the things that came out of Muslim study of the Quran and the Hadith is that many of these disciplines, what we call tafsir, for example, what we call ilm al-hadith, riwayat and dirayat and wal-mustalah and usul al-fiqh and fiqh and the languages of the Arab, the disciplines of the Arabic languages, nahu, sarf, wal-balagha, all of these things that kind of developed over a period of centuries after the initial time of revelation during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And these things took their natural course because circumstances changed. One of the things that we have to be cognizant of is that we as Muslims believe that yes, Islam has a universal message and that it is appropriate for each time and even local circumstance. But that doesn't mean that every single aspect in a particular localized circumstance is going to be applicable somewhere else. So as you mentioned, for example, let's take something even like more basic than that. You'll find in some of the tafsir that some of the ulama will mention kind of mythical or mythological things going back to maybe in Greek mythology, that the earth is supported on the two horns of an ox, and that underneath the earth is this ox that's supporting it. Some of them mention that. And we have to keep in mind, that sounds ridiculous to us, as well it should. There's nothing wrong with that. But keep in mind that they were also sons and daughters of their particular time that they lived in. And of course they were infallible. No one is infallible except the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so anything that they say, we have to take it with the criteria of measuring it up against what we know to be the well-known practice, normative practice of Muhammad ﷺ. And one of the hadith that we can mention in this regard is that every 100 years there will be someone sent, every 100 years there'll be a renewer of the faith, right? And renewer of the faith, not like what some Orientalists have alleged, not a reformer, but a renewer. Renewer means you're not reforming, you're not breaking it apart and putting it back together in a different way, but you're re-articulating something that is going to be linguistically, culturally, socially relevant and appropriate for the people of that time. So, for example, during the time of Muhammad ﷺ, they didn't have hadith written down and read from it. They didn't have books. They didn't have musannafat. They didn't have books written with someone's own words mixed with the verses of the Quran or the hadith. They didn't have universities. They didn't have madrasa. They didn't have curriculum. These are all things that came about later because times change and times develop. So the reason that we need to have living scholars, and I think this is what we're trying to get at here, is that they need to be able to contextualize what someone like Al-Ghazali said, or what someone like Ibn Kathir, or what someone like Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, or any of the great ulama. Because yes, they were speaking for their particular time, and we may not have the proper context of who they were speaking to. Like you read some things about Ghazali, and it seems, pretty harsh. He'll say, like, in some of his books, he'll say that, you should try not to have more than one meal a day, it should only be bread and water. And you read that and you're like, can't do that. But he's speaking to a particular group of people at a particular time, right? And yes, even on a, let's say, a geopolitical level, I wouldn't call it perpetual warfare, but it was kind of from across the Mediterranean, between Europe and between North Africa and the Muslim world, that there was this presumption that it's a hostile state. In other words, you couldn't really go back and forth between those two because there was this presumption that it was a hostile environment. And so their worldview, right, in German, the Weltanschauung, was based upon this understanding of the other, right? But it's not a perpetual understanding of the other. It can change. So many of the rules, for example, that we have that were kind of used at the time, remember, much of the Sharia, or the teachings of Muhammad ﷺ, it's addressing reality, not some type of utopian mythical idea, way of life. So people might be disturbed, for example, that slavery, which was something that was there before Islam, continued to exist in Islam. And you even find in the Quran specifically mentioned for certain expiations, manumission of a slave is on the order. And that's all true. But we have to keep in mind that we don't have to have slavery. We don't have to have slavery as an institution. But if it's happening and it's bound by certain precepts, certain principles. So I think it would be gross of us to assume that slavery as practiced in the Muslim world is the same as slavery as the North Atlantic slave trade. There's nothing like that. Of course, being a slave is not something that anyone would aspire to, but it was a system that was regulated, and at the same time we say that Sharia يعني تتشوف إلى عتق عريض, that Sharia wants people to be free from slavery. It's not something that's to be perpetuated. So if we were to sign up for the UN Charter today and say all Muslim countries, we agree not to have any slaves, perfectly legitimate to do that, in fact recommended, because that's kind of the new understanding of how the world operates. Remember, Muslims, when slavery was around, everyone was having slaves, it wasn't just the Muslims. So it was kind of a general understanding of how things were operating. Even the way that certain states were run, the idea of, you'll see this on some of the neocon sites about Zimmatude and Ahl Zimma, right? Second-class citizenship, they'll say, non-Muslims lived sort of under a protectorate status with Muslims, and they weren't really the same. You'll find some rules, for example, they had to wear a specific type of uniform or dress. They are to walk out on either side of the street and not in the middle of the street. They weren't allowed to maintain their churches and synagogues. They had to leave them as they are. And those rules were there. We're not going to deny them. They're in the books, the Torah, the older books. However, that's a contextualized setting, and we may even have to agree with it, because it was based upon their particular interpretation of how they thought to practice Islam in that particular context at the time. So nowadays, for example, in Egypt, they got rid of Ahl al-Dhimma in the 50s with Abd al-Nasser, and they made even the Coptic Christians full citizens. And that was with the support of the ulama at the time, and ulama who had said it. Why? Because every generation has to look at the Torah, has to look at the tradition, and they have to interpret in a way that's commensurate with the times that they're living in. And the ulama themselves said this. Imam al-Qarafi, for example, said that if you just take what's in the books, if maybe the young girls could, thank you. So, Imam al-Qarafi, who was a 12th century scholar, he said that if you just take what's in the books and try to apply that by reading, and then try to practice it on people without having a full understanding of the context, then you've created a great injustice. You've perpetrated a great injustice. And that means that the living tradition, right? It's not enough that we just rely upon the old books, but we need to develop people who can understand the old books and then contextualize it for the environment that we live in now. In other words, they have to have an understanding of the language, the understanding of what we call maqasid al-sharia, the higher objectives of the Islamic law, the prophetic teachings, so that they know that, you know what, that rule that they were doing was under this particular context, and that context no longer exists, right? The fuqaha, they have a principle that says, الحكم يدور مع العلة وجودا وعدما, that a ruling goes with what we call a legalistic term, ratio legis, or it's the reason why the ruling is there, as long as that particular reason is there. If the reason is no longer there, then we take away the ruling. So for example, they say if wine becomes vinegarized and it's no longer intoxicating, it becomes legal to drink or to use, because it's not wine anymore. So it's not the substance, but it's the property of the substance. If that changes, right, then the reason that we prohibited to begin with no longer exists, and thus it becomes something that becomes permissible. So that's not an easy task. And I have to be honest that the number of scholars in the world who can actually operate on that level are quite few. They're not that many. And this is one of the areas where we're really not doing a good job. It's a communal obligation. So just like we need to have firefighters and doctors and engineers, we also need to have people who are operating at a level that can able to interpret and renew the tradition for not just our generation, but the coming generation. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I think, like you said, it's just a big challenge to try to remain connected to the Sanad, the scholarly tradition, while at the same time applying it to this particular era and not irrelevant ones that were in the past. And I think, as Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad once said, traditional Islam is not just to replicate the positions of the ancients, it's to seek what they sought.
I think we'll give everyone one question.
Yeah, I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to answer
addressing
that.
one of the questions I have in my mind, so it's okay. I can add later.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sorry about the rant. My bad.
Question. Assalamu alaikum. It's really interesting, and I would like to add I have my son, he's also trying to study Islamic studies and he's really into it. At the beginning I had issues because of the current situations and everything else. I was not sure how this will, but listening to you actually made me encouraged that there's a great need. Last 20 years, I've been in the United States for the last almost 30 years, and after 9/11, what I have realized that there are a lot of people coming out and writing Islamic books and explanation of Quran and Hadith. There are some, I'm sure, that are genuine and very good, but I have came across, and I work at the universities, I came across so many books that people are writing out of their retirement without any proper training what they believe, and it's being distributed in many places, in the public libraries, in the mosque, and some of them, when I read about it, we interpreted the same question you were saying about how do we handle the question about killing in the name of Islam, and the points you try to make about being good to neighbors, and I have read text that says, this being a long question actually, it's not a question, how do we address that? That what can we do to stop this madness? So there are a lot of people who say that we should not mix with Christian because they are bad influence. I have read text that encourages people to do it, and people who do not have that scholarly knowledge, they will believe it and then react that way. How do we combat that issue? That's my name is Hasina.
If I understand the question correctly, the issues we have to contend with are a little unprecedented because even our scholars who lived maybe even 100 years ago, they probably couldn't imagine a time where I can get my phone here and tweet something or text it, and then someone all the way across the world in Jakarta, for example, could read it in real time, and then the message goes across like that. So we're dealing with, and then no one is checking who I am when I put that out, right? So kind of the self-regulating system that we had before is completely obsolete. So obviously, we can't stop people from writing books and writing things, but what we can do is try to enforce what we know in our positive image and what we think to be the authentic teachings. And then we try to propagate it and teach it to people. And as they say, it's an open market. Everyone can say anything and everyone can speak. So, in the media, it's usually whoever speaks loudest and most salaciously that gets heard. That's unfortunate. That's kind of nothing against the reporter here, but that's just the way it is. Everyone wants a headline. Everyone wants something that's going to bring up their readership. That's the nature of the beast. But I think we have to kind of take a proverbial step back and say, it's not about how many tweets we get out or how many likes on Facebook, but let's try to affect people's lives on the ground. To me, if one young man or two young men or young women, change their life because of something we read or we said, I don't care about the 3,000 likes of some tweet that I put out or retweet it. That's not the criteria by which we go. And so I think we work locally and think globally. If you try to tackle it all at once on a global scale, where do you start? So you start with yourself, you start with your house, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. That was his way. Keep in mind that when he was living, he was surrounded by two empires, two superpowers. The Sassanid Persian Empire to the east and the Byzantine Empire to the north and west. And they were like the old Soviet Union and the US. No one thought anything of the Arabian Peninsula. They weren't even on the map. They weren't on the radar. It was such an insignificant place. They didn't even have central government. It was just a complete tribal system. And each city was like its own entity, run by one or two tribes. No one thought anything of it, right? Until this message came and things started to change. So, change begins little steps. And, I think we have to kind of reinvigorate and renew that way, to begin with ourselves, begin with our children, making a home for our children that they can feel safe and comfortable and they feel that their Islam brings benefit to their life and it's relevant to them. And not something that you have to hide and be ashamed of outside. you know, we need to give our kids that confidence. They shouldn't go into public school and be afraid because people are going to think they're ISIS or they're terrorists if they act too Muslim. Right? We have to change that perception. We have to make Islam for them a source of strength and a source of character. I won't say a source of pride, not pride, right? Because people take pride in their affiliations. And one of the things, a relevant teaching of, where's James, of Imam al-Ghazali, is that he said, teach your children not to take pride in the things that you possess, that you acquire. So the children shouldn't be like, yo, my dad is this, and my mom does this, and my mom, you know, she drives a Maserati, what does your mom drive? They shouldn't take pride in things like that, right? So sometimes we even take pride in a sense that's in Islam, and we have to be careful about this. Islam is not a tribe. It's not an ideology, right? Because nowadays, instead of ethnic tribalism, we have ideological tribalism, right? And it's rampant, I think, in this country. So, you know, the so-called neocon conservatives, they're a tribe. And the liberals, they're a tribe too. And, you know, the Red Party or the Red State, they have a particular tribe. And people will follow this particular pundit, whether it's Rush Limbaugh or whether it's Stephen Colbert. That becomes like a tribe, right? And they only listen to themselves and only to that tribe. So when we say, for example, if we're offended that people write cartoons about our Prophet ﷺ, we shouldn't say, well, that's my Prophet, in a way that personalizes it, individualizes it to a selfish extent. But we should say, this is the Prophet of humanity, this is the Prophet of God. It's more universal than this. It's not about me, right? We shouldn't take it back to the self, but we should think about to, you know, we need to transcend ourselves, right? The Quran says, وَمَنْ نَهَى نَفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, right? Whoever keeps themselves from hawa, from just following its whim and its caprice, then nothing short of paradise will be guaranteed to them, right? So we've got confused, and now this sort of self-aggrandizement and this selfishness and self-centeredness has come even to our Islamic discourse. And the way that people talk now even about their Islam is like in a selfish, very self-centered way. And it shouldn't be like that. You should transcend your own selves to something much greater and beyond, right? Because the whole idea is you can only be elevated, you can only be something more than you are when you go beyond yourself. But if it's only about you and what you feel and what you eat and what you dress like and what you encounter, then you'll never go beyond yourself. You'll be just stuck in that, in your individuality. But we want to go beyond that. So I think there's a sister back here.
I just have a quick question. I'm in college, and a lot of people ask me, like, what is Islam and all of that, and I never know what to answer. Like, I know a lot about it and everything. I grew up both of my mom and dad, but I never know what to answer, like a quick answer, like the best answer to give them, because there's so much to say. Like, you can sit down for 2 hours and talk about Islam, but like, what's the best thing to say? What's like the one, I want to say not sentence, like a paragraph or something in like 10 minutes that I could say to them that would, yeah, like a summary.
Can you reply your name?
Vesna.
I don't think there's anything you could say. I would rather tell them, let me show you. Come have coffee with me. Come, you know, let's go to the library and study together. Just spend time with me. That's what people respond to. But, you know, there's no magic wand I can give you until you say these 3 words, you know. There's no place like home, there's no place like home. Then you're Dorothy and you go back to, you know, you guess you don't know Wizard of Oz. Wrong generation. But there's nothing magic that you can say. You have to, I think, we have to live Islam first, right? Because if we keep just, one of I think the maladies of the modern era is everything becomes so conceptual. Like, we've made Islam a concept and not something real and tangible. So we like to think of it in these very conceptual terms. Islam is this, Islam is peace. Show me how Islam is peace, right? When I say Assalamu alaikum to somebody, right, not just the words, but do I feel it in my heart? Do I really feel like I want peace to come to that person? Do I want what's best for that person? Do I treat everybody that I encounter in my day like that, right? And, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the disease of the ummah has come to you. Da ilaykum da'ul ummah, al-hasad wal-baghdha, right? Envy and enmity. So this is the disease of all the nations before it has come to you. And then he goes on to say that, you know, you will not truly become believers and Muslims unless you love one another, hatta tahabu, right? And you will not truly love one another until you do one thing. Ifshu salam bayna. Spread peace amongst yourselves. That's what he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was his prescription, right? And ifshu salam, yani min at-tafashi means make it spread, propagate it, make it something like everyone is doing it, disseminate it. That's not just what you say, that's how you live, right? People want to see that, right? People want to see something different. And we live in such narcissistic, nihilistic times. Nothing has meaning anymore. Everyone is so selfish, so self-centered, concerned with themselves. Show them something different. Show them true love and concern for a fellow human being. That's novel today, it's new, right? It used to be kind of the norm. No one does that anymore. So when we start living those meanings, I believe people will respond. People will be interested in that. And most of the people that I know who become Muslim, it wasn't so much by something they read per se, but oftentimes they came into contact with Muslim. I know one story that someone I trusted told me that they saw someone walking down the street and they said, I want to be like that person, just the way they carried themselves. And then they found out they were Muslim and they learned more about Islam and they wanted to become Muslim based upon how someone carried themselves, how they acted. Right? We should be the most courteous, we should be the most upright, the most ethical, the most moral, right? How did they describe the Prophet ﷺ? Right? He was always smiling. Always smiling. Can you imagine that? Always smiling. Right? Can you imagine someone, whenever you encounter them, they're always smiling at you? And to the extent they would say, he made us feel like we were the most important person in the world. He would always give us his full attention. He would never be the first one to move away or to turn away when we were talking to him. When he shook hands with someone, he would wait for the other person to pull away. He wouldn't be the person to pull away. That was how people got affected by the Prophet ﷺ, by seeing that. We need to live that. We need to all to be minor images of Muhammad ﷺ. You know, that's what the Sahaba were. That's what the companions were. Why did people listen to them? Because they had that. Right? There's no magic words. There's no magic wand. But it's hard work to improve your character, to be a person who's smiling at people even though you're feeling lousy inside. Don't think that the Prophet ﷺ didn't have feelings. He did. They would also say, مُتَطَاوَلِ الْأَحْزَانِ, right? He was always contemplative and pensive, people who knew him, but at the same time, his exterior, دَائِمُ الْبِشْرِ, always smiling to people. Right? We need to cultivate our human aspect, right? And then people will see that. And not because we want, no, so we do want them to become Muslim, because we believe it's the way to be a human being. Or otherwise we wouldn't have chosen it. But at the same time, we want good for them. We want whatever is good for them to come to them. It should be more beloved to us, even those who are our enemies and our adversaries, that they repent and come back to the right way than to seek vengeance upon them. This was the way of Muhammad ﷺ. Hind bint Utbah, who was the wife of Abu Sufyan, what did she do? She arranged for an assassin on the battlefield to kill the most beloved uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidina Hamza in Uhud. And in Wahshi, who she hired as an assassin, he was so trained in spears that he had the surest spear. He would never miss his target. And sure enough, when he faced Hamza on the battlefield from far away, he threw a spear and struck him and killed him in the heart. Not only this, she went to his body and desecrated it and cut out his liver and ate from it on the battlefield. Imagine someone doing that to someone you love, someone of your family. Imagine that. But she became Muslim. She became Muslim. And now when we talk about her, we say Hind bint Utbah radiyallahu anha. We say Hind bint Utbah, may God be pleased with her. Because she's not that person anymore. And the Prophet ﷺ gave her salams. And she even once complained about her husband, he didn't spend enough, and he told her, take what you need, and so forth. He spoke to her. And yet that memory is still within him, but that's who he was. That's character, right? To overcome even your hatred or what you think is people's hatred for you or your hatred for them, to not be unjust with them. And the Quran exhorts us, وَلَا يَجْعَلُ لَكُمْ